Clint Lamb, managing editor for the Roll Tide Wire for USA Today and co-host of the Bama Beat for Tide Sports. And he is going to discuss this class with us. Good morning, Clint. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing this morning, Gary?
Good to have you on, buddy. You heard me kind of giving a little bit of background information on this class, and it's not done. Alabama could still sign another player or two in this early period. Certainly probably will look to add one or two guys in February. Just your overall impression of this 2020 class as it stands so far.
I think that Alabama did an excellent job of really addressing a lot of needs, especially defensively. The edge group is as good as I've seen it in recent memory with the 2 5-stars that you mentioned, and Drew Sanders and Chris Braswell. They also added Quindarius Robinson and Will Anderson. All 4 of those guys are top 80 players in the country and really should provide an upgrade to the pass rush. I think that's something that Alabama, from an exterior perspective, on their defense has really lacked in the last couple seasons, especially this past year. Not this season, but last season when they played Clemson in the national championship. I think that was probably one of the biggest contributing factors to Trevor Lawrence and that Clemson offense having their way with Alabama's defense was the fact that, they had Quentin Williams on the interior, but they really struggled to get an exterior pass rush, a complementary pass rush. And when you can't have that type of complementary football, an offense can kind of scheme some things and take a guy like Quentin Williams out of the equation, and that's exactly what Clemson did. And they just didn't have anybody that could kind of compensate for what Clemson was trying to do. And so ever since then, I really think Nick Saban has really tried to address that, not just Nick Saban, the entire Alabama coaching staff. And, I think they lost a guy in Ayabi Anoma who they were not expecting to lose, thought he would be back for not only this season, but next season as well. And then they also are going to be losing Anthony Jennings and Terrell Lewis. I don't think that's necessarily official, even though I guess you can kind of say that it is. Even Nick Saban admitted yesterday that, that they're going to be losing 2 guys. So losing your top 2 players, your 2 most experienced guys, and then losing Ayabi Anoma prior to this season, that really left a lot to be desired at the edge position. And then, just the defensive backs, Alabama is going to be losing several. Nick Saban also mentioned in his press conference yesterday that Alabama was still recovering from losing all those top-tier guys. I think their top 6 defensive backs from a couple of years ago. That included, Anthony Averett, Marlon Humphrey, Minka Fitzpatrick. I mean, the talent was just incredible, and losing all those guys in the same season really put them at a disadvantage as far as depth, and they've continued to try to build that back up. Offensively, it's the first guy you're going to mention is Bryce Young. I think that was an amazing addition to the class, obviously, especially the timing of it with potentially losing Tua Tagovailoa. The running back depth, just really across the board. Really the only concern right now, I think, for Alabama is just they haven't been able to add a tight end. They did add a tight end, just not one maybe that they're looking for that can contribute immediately. And I think that's an area that Alabama will continue to target throughout the offseason.
Clint Lamb with us, the managing editor for Roll Tide Wire of USA Today and co-host of the Bama Beat at tidesports.com, talking recruiting. Yeah, I'm with you on that edge pass rushing class, buddy. It's as good as there is in the country. And you alluded to the running backs and more on Bryce Young in a minute as well. But this running back class, I'm a huge Roydell Williams fan. Anybody that's listened to me the last 2 or 3 years know I think this guy's a stud right up the road in Hueytown. I think Kyle Edwards is a good player. But then you add Jace McClellan. You flip him from Oklahoma yesterday. So I think you arguably have the best running back class in the country as well. Clint, would you agree with that?
I certainly would, and I think Kyle Edwards is a very underrated player as well. He's certainly a guy that I think could end up contributing before his time in Tuscaloosa is done. And so when you combine that with the talented Roydell Williams and Jace McClellan, I mean, you've got 3 guys that really bolster that depth at that position. And, this season in comparison to the last several, Alabama kind of had to go to a 2-headed monster because of the injury to Trey Sanders. Before the season even got started. So it was the Najee Harris, Brian Robinson show for the most part. But in the last few years, you've actually seen Alabama want to utilize at least 3 running backs, and sometimes, in some cases, up to 4. And they just didn't have the depth this season or the experience and guys that they really trusted in that number 3 and number 4 spot. And so adding this trio of guys in this class, I think they really are going to be able to try to get back to that. They're going to probably going to lose Najee Harris. That hadn't been confirmed or anything, but just, all signs point to him probably leaving for the NFL. They will be getting Trey Sanders back to go with Brian Robinson, but then that number 3 and number 4 spot, you have Keelan Robinson still involved. Jerome Ford's, of course, still there as well. Jadarius Townsend, probably think that he's going to maybe make another position switch, but that nothing's, that's just purely speculation on my part. But they have some other bodies in that running back room, but just adding this trio really bolsters the depth and will give Alabama some options, which should really help them, moving forward.
In Bryce Young at quarterback, you've got a guy whose stats at the high school level are just eye-popping. Modern Day is one of the best programs in the country, if not the best. He's played top-flight competition. You look at his high school stats and compare him to Tua, and his are greater. Like Tua, he seems to be college-ready in terms of throwing the football, awareness, presence, can use his feet as well. I mean, just a phenomenal pickup. If Tua goes on to the NFL, which is what I think will still happen, and Mac Jones has played well, and you've got Talia, and obviously you've got Paul Tyson who will factor in next year, but I don't see any reason that Bryce Young won't compete for the starting job if Tua's not here. I mean, he seems to be that good. Not saying he'll win it, but he is potentially a true freshman starter at quarterback. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think that a lot of the things that Nick Saban said about Bryce Young yesterday really speaks volumes for him as a player and him as a person. He really is the complete package, and I think that he's approached this situation in a very mature way. When he's been asked about it, potentially Tua Tagovailoa coming back, he said, almost essentially, this isn't an exact quote, but he basically said, it's a win-win for me. Either Tua leaves and I get a chance to compete for the starting job, or Tua comes back and I get the opportunity to learn from one of the best for a year. So I think that's the right mentality to have, and it's certainly something, he could learn a lot from Mac Jones as well. Mac has been in the program for quite a while, and I think right at this point you have to assume it's probably going to be Mac Jones if Tua chooses to leave, just because there's been nothing that Mac has done up to this point to have lost him the job. He's done everything that he's been asked to do, has played phenomenal, has done really well in scrimmages and 8A games and the games that he's played. Obviously the 2 pick sixes were costly mistakes, but outside of those, he's played pretty flawless football, and I know he's got a lot of confidence. That the locker room really loves him. So Mac Jones should be considered the front runner for that starting quarterback job next year. But Bryce is a kid, like you said, he's kind of college ready. He's the only thing that maybe he needs to continue to try to do is put on some weight. He was 170 pounds just a few months ago. I think they got him up to about 183. The hope would be you could probably get him at least clear 190, if not get up there to that Russell Wilson range at 200 or 205. I think that would really benefit him. But outside of that, if he was a 6'3", 200+ pound quarterback, I think he'd be considered a generational talent and a true generational talent, not just that gets thrown around a lot. And I do think he has the ability, but he would be a quarterback that comes around, in all honesty, once every 10 years. It's really the only thing that his game lacks right now is just size. And so Alabama will probably have to do some things, just like the Seattle Seahawks have to with Russell Wilson, or, the Arizona Cardinals have to with Kyler Murray, to try to get him outside the pocket a little bit, make sure that you give him the best opportunity to succeed, but he can win from the pocket too. And I think that makes him a very special player, and he'll certainly be involved in the competition.
Clint, it was a very good year in state, and Alabama cleaned up. They really cleaned Auburn's clock in in-state recruiting this year, which is what you want to do when it is a good year in state. You want to flex your muscles. 9 in-state signees, and a lot of guys that are highly rated. It was a really good year in state, and Alabama took advantage.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important for Alabama, as nationally recognized as they are, and they can really go. They can go to Hawaii, they can go to California, they can go up to New Jersey, they can go to Baltimore and recruit really well. But it can be a little bit different when you're recruiting your top in-state guys and getting a lot of those commitments, because they've grown up, following the Alabama program and the dynasty and the rivalries and all those things, a lot more closely. And so you get maybe a little bit more passion on the front end or love for Alabama. A lot of these guys that came from out of state over their time during their time in Tuscaloosa, they've come to love the program, obviously, and that is to be expected. But just the hometown feel or the home state feel really helps when it comes to, the chemistry within your program. And I think it's great that Alabama's continued to add and dominate the state, over a team like Auburn, who recently beat them in the Iron Bowl. Just to bounce back and still be able to get a massive win on the recruiting trail is big for Alabama.
Let's get to, I guess, some perceived weaknesses of the class, and you already alluded to it. Caden Clark, the tight end sign, he's a nice prospect, going to be a good player, but he's more of a physical, run blocking, guy that's got some athletic ability, certainly, but he's not the pass-catching tight end that Alabama needs. I think you saw when Miller Forstall went out how limited Alabama was at the tight end position. They missed out on Eric Gilbert. Darnell Washington's still out there. Address the tight end position and what type of shot you think Alabama has to get Washington in this class.
Well, first of all, I think with the tight end position, the numbers are certainly there. Right now, with the addition of Caden Clark, they have 7 scholarship tight ends on the roster if you include a guy like Kendall Randolph as a tight end, and would have 8 if you consider Chris Owens. I still consider at least Owens to be an offensive lineman and potentially Randolph as well, but they see some reps, of course, at tight end. I think the big problem that people have, and especially the coaching staff, is that they don't have a complete tight end. You saw several years ago with O.J. Howard, he was a very underrated blocker. He was an excellent receiver. He was just a complete package. Last year with Irv Smith Jr., you had a guy that could really block well, also was an excellent receiver. That was probably his strong suit. And even a guy like Hale Hinges, he was more of a blocking tight end, but he also provided being a red zone threat and was a little bit underrated as a receiver, and we've seen that during his time in the NFL. This season, they're kind of lacking that guy that can really do both and do both well, and I think that's something that Alabama's really trying to address, especially getting a dominant red zone threat at the tight end position, and that's exactly what Darnell Washington would bring to the table should he choose to come to Alabama. 6'8", 260 pounds, extremely athletic for a guy that size, can move really well. I think he would really add to Alabama's roster. Their chances, from what I've heard, he's more of a Georgia lean right now from all indications, but that does not mean that Alabama's out of it, and it's possible that they could end up securing his signature. If they don't land Washington, a guy like Brandon Frazier, who is a 3-star tight end out of McKinney, Texas. He currently holds an Alabama offer, but I think it's more of a kind of slow play, wait and see type of offer. He's the number, I think, just outside of the top 600. He's the number 24 tight end, 6'7", 247. So he's got a lot of that size. He can maybe bring some balance. I think he's a little bit underrated as a receiver. That's certainly a guy to keep an eye on as well as kind of a fallback option. But the hope and what Alabama, I think, is looking for is that complete tight end to where you don't have to, based off of it. Obviously, if you have Kendall Randolph or Chris Owens in there, you're seeing a lot more blocking from the tight ends. If you have guys like Miller Forrestall or Jaleel Billingsley, maybe a little bit more of the receiving aspects are being utilized. And I think they want a guy that doesn't really have those kind of tells. And so that's what they're more so focusing on, trying to improve the talent level and the completeness of the tight end position.
We got a phone call for you, Clint. We'll get to Tom here in just a second. All right, Alabama's at 22 signees. They're still recruiting several players. Might still potentially add one in this early signing period, and then there's guys like McKinley Jackson that are out there that Alabama would like to have. I guess some of it will depend on what happens in the draft. But how many potentially do you think Alabama will take in this class?
That's very interesting because it could go so many different directions. Right now, of course, like you said, they have the 22 signees. They have the 4 guys that have not signed, and that, of course, is Damian George, the 3-star tackle, Javon Baker, the receiver, Jamil Burrows, and Jason Jones. Both those guys are defensive linemen, even though I think Jason Jones ends up on the offensive side of the football. Should he choose to come to Alabama, there's some academic work that needs to be done there. If they start adding some of these guys, I've heard the term blue shirt be thrown around for a guy like Jason Jones. I don't, know. I guess we're just kind of have to play the wait and see game. But from a number standpoint, it's very fluid at the moment, and I haven't exactly pinned down. It's just going to really depend on how many guys leave for the draft and what Alabama has available.
Clint, what's going on with Jordan Burch? I know he committed to South Carolina, but I'm seeing this morning that he still hasn't signed. Is that a done deal to Will Muschamp and the Gamecocks, or is there still a possibility that he might wind up somewhere else?
Well, I do think that, there's some concerns for him because, he played with Will Muschamp's son in high school, and that's his hometown team. It just seemed like a natural fit for him. But, Will Muschamp, his job security, is he going to be there for the entire time that Burch is on campus or has to be on campus? Obviously, he can't go to the NFL until after 3 years. I think that's somewhat of a concern for him. He wants to play for Will Muschamp. I think he wants to play for his hometown team. But it's just the uncertainty and the lack of development sometimes from South Carolina in comparison to a team like Georgia or Clemson. That kind of plays into the decision-making process as well. I don't really know what in particular is holding him up. I think it's maybe a combination of things. If I had to guess, I do think he ends up signing with South Carolina, but it's got to be a concern anytime that a guy commits to you and then turns around and won't send you the paperwork on signing day. So, whatever the snag is, hopefully, for South Carolina's sake, they're able to close on him.
All right, we're running out of time, but let's get to Tom, who's been patiently holding on the Bud Light hotline and wants to get through with you, Clint. Hey, Tom, good morning.
Morning, Gary. Good morning, Clint.
Morning.
Some good information there. If you're looking for some work, well, Gary will let you on every Thursday.
What you got, Tom?
Clint, I got to run two things by you. To me, the most interesting recruit we had to sign yesterday is Christian Story. Given the way football is this day and age, he can play so many different positions. Even quarterback, I think, is one of the most interesting recruits that we signed yesterday.
I completely agree with you. And the fact that he brings such a level as far as a combination of size and athleticism and his versatility to play so many different spots really make him an intriguing piece. For his sake, what I hope doesn't happen is, sort of what's happened with Jadarius Townsend, which was in a similar situation coming out of Tanner High School up in North Alabama. He played quarterback in high school, had played a lot of different spots for Tanner, and then he gets to Alabama, and they haven't been able to lock him in at any one position. Whether it be defensive back, whether it be receiver, whether it be running back, it's really kind of hindered his development, constantly switching him around. And so I hope for Christian Story's sake that they're able to get him in there. If he wants to try his hand at quarterback, I think Nick Saban is going to let him. Nick did yesterday in his press conference, kind of alluded to the fact that maybe that's not the spot that Christian wants to play, and whether that be receiver, running back, defensive back, just the hope is that you can get him into where he can excel as soon as possible, and then allow him the time to be able to develop. But certainly is a talented kid and is really one of the more underrated parts of Alabama's 2020 recruiting class.
I think that if there's ever, to me, my opinion, if there's ever been a kid that could come in and contribute on both sides of the ball, I think he's one of them. And, they tried that a little bit with Trayvon Diggs when he first got there, trying to figure out where he was going to go. But I believe this is a kid that can excel at two positions. I really do, because of his natural instincts, coached by his dad and all this kind of stuff. And but the second thing I want to run by you is, would you agree that when you're doing a recruiting website that it's all speculation until you actually to the kid signs?
I would certainly agree to that, to at least a certain
now,
extent.
My second part of that is a suggestion to help you out with recruiting service is this. Start a medical evaluation of all the players because of the injuries we had at Alabama, and do some speculating on the medical side before they sign and all that kind of stuff, and I guarantee you your readership will go up.
All right, Tom, great call.
40%.
Thank you. We got to get to the
Gary,
yeah,
thanks,
Tom,
man.
thank you. Yeah, Clint, I know Tom is saying that probably is a little much. Plus, I don't think you want to label a kid as injury prone before he ever gets to college, do you?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I understand where he's coming from, especially with the the concerns injury-wise that Alabama's dealt with, but there's a lot more that goes into it than that, and you certainly don't, like you said, want to give a kid or label a kid injury prone before he even gets to your program. And I actually think that could hurt the way Alabama's perceived to future recruits if you got media people kind of criticizing recruits for being injury prone.
Yeah, we speculate enough on it as it is. I think somewhere you got to draw the line. But thank you for the phone call, Tom. All right, Clint, good stuff today. Tell the listeners about, I mentioned you're involved with a couple of different projects and on Twitter as well. Let them know how they can get some of your information. Yeah,
absolutely. As far as written content, if you guys want to check me out, I'm the managing editor at Roll Tide Wire. And then, of course, if you want to hear, the podcasting and stuff that I do with Cecil Hurt and Brett Hudson and those guys at tidesports.com and the Tuscaloosa News, that is the Bama Beat podcast. And then, of course, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Clint R. Lamb. So go check me out there. And I appreciate you having me on today, Gary, and I hope to do it again soon.